And, okay. I wanted to look at what I call Wold Newtonry as scholarship. When I got involved in it, I noticed that there was no formal theory and methodology. In a sense, I have a PhD in American Studies, and my dissertation is on the superhero. That was of immediate interest to me. And here's an example of the way Wold Newtonists look at the world. So Lalune published this supposed drawing of Rocambole. There's Rocambole. He's a roguish anti-hero. That was, in fact, the portrait of the Emperor Napoleon III. And the drawing was, it fooled the censors, and all of Paris immediately recognized the Emperor's features. The caricature thus highlighted Napoleon III's personality similarities at a time when his popularity was already on the wane. Now, Jess Nevins, who's a Wold Newtonist, responds to this with that quote of the post on the list, and he said, an ordinary academic looks at that passage and goes on to write an article about French censorship. A Wold Newtonian, on the other hand, looks at that passage and thinks, this reveals an untold story of how Rocambole replaced Napoleon III. Okay, great. And so the difference between Wold Newtonry, or parascholarship, and regular scholarship is in the academic discourse community. Now, discourse community is the way it's a group of people who think and talk about things in a similar way. And there's certain conventions about discourse communities. Communication, including publication, relationships between scholars, and treatment of sources and texts, where parascholarship parallels real scholarship. Okay? Now, there's usually, in any field, in history, English, psychology, whatever, the scholarly discourse community is the same as academic discourse because all the academics are scholars, and most of the scholars are academics. In Wold Newtonry, there's a few differences. First, there's no academy, there's no institutions, there's no schools, there's no central journals or websites, or authorities. Anyone can set up a website. Secondly, there's no academics. I think I'm sort of one of the few academics. I think I'm the only person with a PhD. I'm not even a college professor. I work at a college, but I'm not a college professor. So there are no academics. There's no formal understanding of the convention of academic discourse. If anybody's been to graduate school, the first course you take is theory and methodology. In other words, how to be a graduate student. In other words, here is what we do in this discipline. There is no formal understanding of that, although most Wold Newton scholars are courteous to each other and cite each other's articles. But there are shared norms. Typically, farmers' work is respected and shouldn't be contradicted lightly. But since farmers' work is an interpretation of original texts, he looked at the Tarzan novels, he looked at Doc Savage novels, and since some of farmers' theories are at odds with those texts, he can be contradicted when you've got better evidence and a better argument. Now here's the convention of communication. In the academic, you have university courses. Well, there are no courses in Wold Newtonry. Conference papers, this is the first time, well actually last year we did it, but we're not presenting our Wold Newton papers, we're talking about what we're doing. I'm going to see if we can do that next year. Journal articles in the academia versus web articles in Wold Newtonry. Books from university presses versus books from popular presses, like the one we're coming out with. Validity through peer review. If you send an article into a journal, they send it out to other academics to read them. We do validity through consensus citation. In other words, an article has validity if other people cite it. And academic paper-centric, Wold Newton web-centric, because the web is free, and because in academia, web publishing hasn't caught on because there's all these issues of legitimacy, there's established journals and so forth, there's prestige, but there's no money in Wold Newtonry, so none of those things apply. And scholarly relations. Now this is where we're very much the same. We both refine, extend, and transmit knowledge. We both have accurate summaries of and acknowledgments of other works. We're committed to intellectual property rights have to be respected. The differences is is that in real academic work, truthfulness is an ethical norm and the basis for rules of academic professionalism. In Wold Newtonry, it's a fiction about fiction. We're pretending that these people are alive. And so, the truth, not so much. And there's this thing I call outsourcing. So when you have someone else's text, an example of this is Jess Nevins is another scholar, and he proposed that John Carter's nephew in the John Carter series, if everyone knows that, it was this guy Walter Carter, and he based it upon a diary that he found in a library. And I came along and discovered that he had only looked at the first 3 John Carter novels, and so his conclusions didn't fit, but he claimed he had a source. So I came up with Matthew Nicholas Carter, M.N. Carter. His diary was supposedly by somebody named M.N., and so I said that Matthew Nicholas Carter produced fake diaries as gag gifts for his family, and Jess must have found one of those. And so I outsourced it. He's a friend of mine, and it's okay to do this. And in fact, I'm going to have to outsource Chuck next year when I write an article on law of OPA. Okay. Treatment of sources. Now, in academia, verifiable sources. You can't fabricate your data. Wold Newtonry, you can invent sources. You can misrepresent published work. You have to use, in academia, you have to acknowledge relevant sources and evidence and contradiction. We just ignore, or we declare fictional a source if it's a problem. Sources, depictions, and illustrations must be reproduced accurately. I'm going to show you that in a second. Undesirable findings have to be acknowledged. So, in academia, you have to relate to your sources as truthful. We don't. Let me give you an example of this. I have special access to hidden libraries and sources because my great-grandfather, Francis Allen Coogan, served the shadow and died in his service. And so I am allowed to get, my great-grandfather was in vaudeville, and I say that he's the one who connected the shadow, the real living shadow of the person, to the radio, because he had connections, and he was a bar owner at the time. If you read the Shadow novels, the shadow was always in bars. We're only 15 minutes old.
Oh, actually.
Okay. So I just said like closer to half an hour. Anyway, and an example of misrepresented published work, Farmer himself uses Burke's Puritan and Extinct Peerage and claims that anyone could look at those and find Tarzan, find out who he is, and people have tried and it doesn't work. Okay, go on. Here's manipulation of an illustration. The one on the left was the real one. The one on the right is one that has been published. And look, there's a photo credit. There's a fake photo credit in the one on the right. Okay, go on. And now, Chuck.